today to get to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Nicole Patton Terry. She is the Olive and Manuel Bordas Professor of Education in the School of Teacher Education. She is the Director of the Florida Center for Reading Research and the Director of the Regional Education Lab Southeast at FSU. She is the founding director of two university-based research entities, the Urban Child Study Center at Georgia State University and the Village at FCRR, where researchers work collaboratively with diverse school and community stakeholders to promote student success among vulnerable children and youth. And her research and scholarly activities have been supported by various organizations, including the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, the Institute of Educational Sciences, and the Spencer Foundation. With way more accolades than I have time to give in this introduction, I present to you Dr. Nicole Patton Terry.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. This mic is a little iffy, so I'm going to use my teacher voice and hope that everyone can hear me, though do wave your hand if you can't, okay? I am sensitive to that need. So thank you for joining us to talk about collaborators. We promised you an interactive session. Hopefully you get what you came for beyond lunch. I am a researcher, and in fact, when we asked you all when you came in the room, we said, are you primarily coming into this room as a researcher or not a researcher? Two groups, that's it, that's all you get. Well, I'm a researcher, and so if I'm a researcher, that means I've got more questions than I've got answers, and that's how I navigate the world. Ask my family if you don't agree. So for me, for the majority of my career and my time, I've been focused on trying to solve this problem, that poor reading achievement in school is not just a problem, it's the singular problem, the thing that we must figure out how to address and how to support our children with. In fact, I've been trying to tackle this problem for about 20 years now or so. And what you're looking at here are the student performance on our nation's reading test, which is given to students at different grade levels periodically. In particular, you're looking at 4th grade students and 8th grade students. This green line represents proficient levels, okay? What you can see over time, at least from 1992 all the way up through 2021, is that the lines are pretty flat. And the line for student performance is always below the green line. So this has been a persistent problem that we've had since 2002 when I was a graduate student at Northwestern, and FCRR, the center that I work for now, was founded, all the way through to COVID-19 when that happened to all of us and we experienced the outcomes, we're continuing to experience the outcomes of the pandemic. And what you generally see, in fact, is right before the pandemic and continuing in that direction, not only are children struggling, but performance seems to be declining on average. So it's getting worse, it's not getting better in the time that I've been trying to address this problem. And what's particularly troubling for me is the problem seems to be much worse for kids who are more vulnerable to having difficulty in school. So overall, what you see, for example, in 2019 for 4th graders, is about 1/3 of them are performing at proficient levels in school. But if you start to look at student subgroups, you start to see it's much worse, for example, for children of color, where Black students and Hispanic or Latino students are performing at about 1 in 5 are performing at grade level expectations. If I start to look at students with disabilities, students who are multilingual learners, we get to about 1 in 10. So it's really not good for most students, because 1 in 3 is nothing to call home about. But it's really not good for kids who are particularly vulnerable to not doing well in school. So I've devoted a lot of time trying to figure out how to solve this problem. And like most researchers, I've addressed it through my research. Most reading researchers, many of them, I should say, are very much so like me. We see lots of kids. These are all the grandchildren in my family, plus or minus 3. Since this picture, there's been 3 more, okay? When you look at, I know that's the effect you want. When you make a presentation personal, this is what happens. So when you see these kids, and some of you can see them, when you look at them, you can see differences amongst them just by looking at them. See gender differences, right? The oldest in this picture at this time is about 16. Youngest is about 4 months, right? You can see gender differences. We've got half boys, half girls. You can see height differences. You can see certain personality traits, for example, here. You can see who's really trying to smile for mom that's taking that picture and who's really not trying to be here right now. Probably see some behavioral differences here, maybe some emotional differences here. Those are all the things you can see when you look at them. What you can't see is the variation that exists within this family. You can't see that there are children in this family who are nonverbal. There are children in this family who have significant mental health concerns. We have children in this family who are performing 2 and 3 grade levels above expectation, and children who are performing 2 and 3 levels below expectation, right? All in the same family. We have families whose parents are teachers in schools, and families whose parents are vice presidents of banks, and families whose parents are at reading research centers. And so we have different things that as individual families we can provide for these students. And we live all over the country. We live in Michigan, and we live in California, and we live in Georgia, and we live in Florida. So even the context in which we're living is giving different resources to these children, right? To make sure they're reading and succeeding in school. As researchers, we want to understand how all those factors are related to that reading. And can we come up with patterns? Are there things we can observe, things that we can measure, that we can see about how these children vary in their reading development, despite all those differences? And is any of that variability systematic? And if it is systematic, is any of it malleable? Can we change it? Can we do something about it? So for me, I've been looking at using a framework like this one. This framework is particularly infamous in our field. It's Hollis Scarborough's reading rope. I did my postdoc with Hollis, so it's not a shocker that I looked at this. And I was particularly interested in the language part of this rope. This rope is the idea that there are all these individual sort of skills that children bring to the table that support their reading and performance at any given time, and then over development. So over time, kids get more strategic and they get more automatic in these skills. They become more fluid readers over time. Like many reading researchers, and many researchers, I would say beyond reading, I focus on one thing. So I'm up here in the language domain, and in particular, I'm looking at language structures. And in particular, I'm looking at language structures for Black kids. Because I can look at from research and figure out that for Black students, many of them use language structures, particularly spoken dialect variation, where their speech patterns look very different than what you see on the page. And what we know is how you understand and process speech makes a difference to how well you read and learn to read and write. So I'm trying to figure out whether or not there's any sort of systematic variation in these language structures that kids bring to the task of reading and writing. And does it make a difference to how well they learn to read and write? And there are 3 different ways that I've tried to study this. I've done studies that looked at cognition, so what's happening up here in the brain, the processes that are involved in underlying reading, and whether or not that makes a difference. I've looked at performance. Behaviorally, what's happening up here translates to what we see when children perform different tasks. So what's happening in reading and writing performance. And then based on that, what might we do in instruction? Okay? So for example, I can design a study and have designed studies that have looked at whether or not for my 2 kiddos here, both of whom have certain speech patterns, but one child has speech patterns that are aligned more with print, and one has speech patterns that mismatch print. For example, if they're both reading the word toothpaste, one has cognitive structures that maybe shows toothpaste, and one has structures that maybe shows toothpaste. Do those children somehow, there's their behavior, is something happening up here in the lexicon that's a little different from them based on their linguistic structures? So I do like most researchers. I design experiments and I design tasks. For example, I make little robots, and I have the robots, they all say the word, they look at this picture, and I tell the children, listen carefully to the robots as they tell me what the name of this is. And when you listen to them, is that a right way to say it? Is that okay to say it that way? Breakfast, or breakfast, one that aligns with print, one that aligns more with their speech patterns, one that suggests a speech error and likely a disorder. And if it is okay to say it that way, can you teach them to say it, right? I can give tasks like this to lots of kids to understand what's happening up here and how they understand these speech patterns and how it might relate to how well they read and write. And if I do that enough, what I might learn, what I might discover, what we have discovered is that it appears that their lexicon actually has features of both language structures there. So they are bidialectal. It is different than being bilingual, for example. They have different features there. They accept both of those features there. They use both of those features to figure out how they're going to read and write. There are real implications for this discovery. When, for example, we often hear people talk about teaching kids like them to speak mainstream English, to read and write mainstream English. It takes a lot of instructional time to do that. But if they already know it, then why am I teaching it to them, right? So that's a real implication of that discovery. There's other implications I'm interested in. What if that kid has a reading disability? Would something be different for that student? What if that student has multiple risks associated with their achievement? So maybe I've got a lot of these language differences, but I come from a much more affluent family. I live in a neighborhood that has a lot of resources available to me. I have a teacher who provides a certain kind of instruction. So that dialect doesn't matter as much for me as perhaps my peers who have different circumstances at home and in the classroom. And what's the tipping point for them? Because if dialect maybe matters for all of them, but maybe there's a tipping point that pushes it over, where it makes it so that it becomes a factor that matters and maybe even bothers reading achievement. Lots of questions still going on for me in my head about this. I can spend another 20, 25 years focused on it. But is that enough? Is knowing that, is making that discovery gonna address the achievement gap I said I was here to focus on in the first place? Because if I look at 20 years of data, what I see is only these kids get to read on grade level. And it's just not enough. So does answering my question really solve the problem? Are we missing the big picture? And important for us as researchers in the room is doing that limiting our science, both its interpretation and its impact. Now, by this point, I've started a research center at Georgia State, and I've had lots of partners who worked with us in the city of Atlanta to improve outcomes for children across the metropolitan area. And what you see here are school districts, you see state agencies, you see early learning centers, museums, the theater that was in the local area, centers that are specifically focused on workforce development, economic vitality, all of these folks coming together around issues associated with improving outcomes for children, because we were very focused on improving child well-being. And none of these people know that I made these discoveries about dialect differences as they relate to reading. That's not how they see me when I go in that room, no matter how much I tell them. In fact, they'll ask me if I know somebody who knows that can come talk to them about it before they ask me. Because I'm not in their frame, in our partnership work, I'm there because I'm there to help with their children's well-being in the city of Atlanta. So there's a problem here. And the problem really is that how they see the problem is not how I see the problem. So I get the opportunity to move to Florida State in 2018. It's an opportunity to refocus and think about what is the problem I'm trying to solve. And after all, I'm going to figure it out at FCRR. Florida Center for Reading Research has been at FSU for 20 years, and this tagline is true: improving reading through science. There have been incredible discoveries about reading and everything associated with reading that have happened right here in Tallahassee, at Florida State University, and they all happen at FCRR and have informed not just how we understand what's happening with reading for children here, but literally around the world. And those research findings have informed practice and informed policy and continue to do so because there are still discoveries to be made. We know a lot of things. We know a lot of things about how to help most children learn how to read and write in school, but we don't know everything. There's much more we need to understand, for example, about how to teach students with autism how to read. There's much more we need to understand about how to involve families in reading. There's much more we need to understand about what to do for our multilingual learners in reading. There's much, much more that we need to understand how to do. But while we're continuously doing this research that's continuously informing practice and continuously informing policy, I think I've figured out what I got to work on here. It's not that we don't know enough. We're just not getting it done. We're not doing what needs to be done to improve reading outcomes for kids, as our community partners just told us, right? So what we really want, the problem we're really trying to solve, is that We want practitioners, whether they be teachers or clinicians, policymakers, we want them to make decisions based on evidence. And if we researchers are being really honest with ourselves, our evidence. We do care about our evidence and whether or not the evidence we are generating is making an impact on the world. We want our evidence to give people the confidence that they can be certain in the decisions that they're making about the people that they serve. Me too. So when I moved to Tallahassee, and what you can let me walk over here and so you can see, right here is where I live. This little green circle is where I live. There's Orange Avenue, there's Monroe Street. These are our major thoroughways. Florida State and Florida A&M are right here, right? This is about 5 miles from door to door. In driving to work every single day, I pass by the lowest performing schools in Tallahassee when it comes to reading achievement. This was the percentage of students who were performing on grade level in 2019. Thankfully, you see lots of arrows going up because things are getting better in some of our schools, not so much in some of our other schools. But how is it that the place where the greatest discoveries about reading are being made are surrounded by schools full of kids who are not doing well in reading? That seems to be a problem for me, especially for the problem I'm trying to solve, right? So I'm ready to go. When we get here, I am ready to come in and address reading in this place. I got my cute little scientist white jacket on. I got my grand ideas, questions with some answers now, and I'm gonna walk into these schools and try to help, right? And certainly there are things wrong in these schools if kids are performing in this level, right? There are real problems here. Things feel like they might be on fire. But you walk in the door and you realize, okay, there's some people who are doing some things here. They might not be as effective as I would like them to be, but they're trying to address the problem. Then there's my very own colleagues here, y'all are there too, doing stuff in schools that may or may not be aligned with what I'm trying to do in schools, and I don't even know you're there. Right? And while we're doing that, there are actual professionals in the building, people who are paid, who have training, knowledge, and expertise to support these children, and they've been there all along. You just got here. And there's always a guy. There is always a guy who's just throwing stuff at it, right? And that guy, as frustrating as we and all of our evidence and knowledge might be about that guy, I like that guy, because that guy's been there. He's been there for a very long time doing what he thinks he can and what he knows is best to support the children and families who are in his community, because they are of and from him. So that guy should be there. And while we're doing all of that, we fail to look up and realize that whatever is happening in this school is a symptom of whatever is happening outside of this school. It's not just because of what you think you see happening in scores and in classrooms and in school grades. It's generally a much bigger issue there. And thus far, my little grand idea is not focused on that at all. So really, for us as researchers, when we're trying to get to this point of translating what we know about our evidence and making sure it has an impact out there in the world, we're really trying to solve 3 different problems. Sometimes it's we don't know what works. And when we don't know what works, we really want we want to do our basic studies and our efficacy studies so we can try to figure out what is malleable, what does matter, what is predictive, what can I change. And I might engage my stakeholders in that work, but typically I don't. Typically, I just want to go figure it out. And then I'll come to you when I have something that I think you might be able to use. And maybe we can work on it then. But if I know what works, my biggest issues are much more about getting the end user to do it and getting them to do it at scale. That typically is when I move into effectiveness studies, dissemination studies, right? I start to look at whether or not I can get to implementation in the real world. Sometimes I tend to those root causes, often I don't. But I will engage my stakeholders in it because I want us to work together to figure out how to make this thing I found really matter in their real world context. And I'm going to sit and pontificate and figure out, and let's work together to make sure this all happens. But at the end of the day, teachers just want to know what you're supposed to do on Monday. They just want to help the kids who are in front of them right now. And what they want is for me to walk in, my very stylish Birkin bag, my best Scandal coat, and just let them know I got it. It's handled. This is what you should do. But every researcher in this room, because we love our questions, we know that for us, the answers are usually if-thens. It's never just do this. It's always, well, if you see this, do this. Maybe if you see that, do that. That's what that feels like to them. They still don't have an answer. They still don't know what to do on Monday. And you are becoming more of a problem than a solution because you're wasting time. They've got to figure out what to do. I think it's important to also ground this conversation above us. This isn't just about us as individual researchers. This is also a larger conversation about the value of universities, how it is that they play in their local communities, whether or not they do contribute to these outcomes. And so you see, every once in a while, the Chronicle will put an article out or an opinion out with titles like, "Can a University Save the World?" Or "Are research universities a wasted resource?" And we should be concerned about those conversations because it suggests that we are not helping people solve their problems, and many universities make use of public funds. So whether or not we want to agree with this discussion or not, we're still in it. So the National Academies suggest that maybe the solution here is public engagement. This idea that there is an exchange of knowledge and information that is bidirectional or multi-directional and allows for groups that differ to come together and find common ground. We in universities often make the argument, the case for that, through our service. This is important and critical to the mission of universities. How we serve, how we show up in our communities absolutely matters. So it has to be a part of the conversation. And so you often hear talk about community engagement. We talk about service learning courses. We talk about volunteering. We talk about arts events in our communities. We talk about all these ways in which we're showing up. But we also have to make sure we talk about how we're showing up in our research. Our research engagement matters. And this is an international conversation. It's not just about us in the US. If you go look at, these are the public funding agencies in Canada, United Kingdom, and Australia, and what you see is talk about things like the demonstrable contribution that excellent research makes to society and the economy. They're very much so trying to figure out how to define and hold researchers accountable and universities accountable for the research that we do and its impact on society. Now, what's challenging about this is there are terms everywhere. People are talking about knowledge mobilization. They're talking about collaborative research. They're talking about research engagement. And it's kind of like they agree with each other, but often you can't find the thread. So it can be difficult to understand what we mean when we say public research engagement. I'm going to depend on our friends at the University of Oxford to help us understand it. So at this particular university, on this particular site, they have quite a few resources that are available to help people think about how it is you engage the public in research. I also want to draw our attention to others that are available, like this toolkit from Chicago Beyond, which really specifically addresses this notion of when you ask communities to join the team, what are the equity dynamics there in the room? Who is asking the questions? What are the priorities? And who decides? Who holds the money? Who benefits from it? And how is it that we as researchers, but also funders, are accountable in this space? How are community members accountable in this space? If we mean partnership, that means both ways. So how are they showing up and how are we showing up? But what we have to keep in mind as researchers is we're in the business of developing knowledge. That's what we do. We generate knowledge. And knowledge is power. But then there's privilege and power, isn't there? So we shape the knowledge that gets generated and developed in the world. So how are we thinking about these issues when we go ask to research this young man yet again for his benefit or for ours? So now, maybe it's not about the problem I'm trying to solve. Maybe it's much more about the problem that they're trying to solve, and how it is that I show up to engage in that space, how it is that I decide to help. People always want to know how you get started on this, and there are different ways and things to think about it. Our friends in Oxford say you got to think about the who you want to engage with, the why you want to engage, how you engage, and you have to evaluate it to see if it matters. So how did I do this, or how have I done this thus far? in this space in Tallahassee? Well, first, you have to learn about the place you want to do the research, the who. Who is it that you want to engage with? You can do a landscape analysis to figure out what the issues are as they see them and think beyond whatever you think your issue is. And try to figure out how you can thread that needle. You need to look and listen where they are. If they read the paper, are you reading the paper, or are you reading the New York Times and the Washington Post? Are you watching CNN or ABC News, or are you watching the nightly news? Are you reading the local newspapers? Are you looking at their local Facebook pages? When I got here, I looked not just at, I knew I was interested in schools, so I was looking at the school board and the school district's website. But I was also looking at all the public available data in Florida to look at what was happening from the Casey Foundation. Our chamber has a scorecard on child outcomes. How are they looking at it? Department of Ed, how are they looking at it? As it turns out, when I got here, there were recent reports that had been done on patterns of resegregation in schools in Florida. And there were community health assessments that had been done. All not necessarily tied directly, I thought, to my question, but they were front page news while I was here. So I went and understood what those issues were. And then you try to situate your work in the place you want to do it. I knew I wanted to do the work here in our own backyard. So, in other words, how do I take Hollis's rope and attach it to all the issues I heard coming up when I did my landscape analysis to figure out what was happening in this community, right? Side note, Hollis calls this a rope. I had always called it a braid, because my frame was braiding my own hair and my daughter's hair. So I was always thinking about, how do I attach this braid to this child and figure out why it is that reading may or may not be happening in this space. Well, let's look at the elementary schools in Leon County where we want this partnership to exist. And I'm putting Florida A&M up there on purpose because they're here too, right next door. So whatever's happening here very likely has to do with what's happening there. Well, these are all the schools in 2019 where more than 50% of students were not passing the reading test. And these are all the schools where greater than 15% of students had IEPs, or they were students who were receiving services for special education. And those of us who do research in special education know that most students who are receiving services for disabilities likely are receiving supports for reading, writing, and language. So a large number of those kids very likely need support with reading. And here are all the schools where more than 50% of kindergartners are showing up not ready. So even if your reading instruction is great, they're not ready to benefit from it yet. You should notice certain patterns, by the way. You see where I live, you see where the Parkway is, you see where I-10 is. So there are clearly some underlying root causes that are happening in these pictures. And they make it very clear to me at this point in time that addressing reading achievement in these schools could not just really be about one thing, could it? Not if that's what they're thinking about and what they're focused on. So once you start to understand, now you got to get to the how. How are you going to make this happen? You've got to meet people. You have to show up. You have to go to where they are. And don't just start at the top. You can't just go looking for the superintendent. You got to go look for families, teachers, principals, people at all spaces, people outside of schools, because there are lots of organizations that are existing and doing work in schools. If you're only focused on people in schools, you're not focused on the whole problem. You have to be prepared with talking points, hence your message boxes in front of you. What are you going to say to them? Do not make a cold call that you're not prepared for. Don't just show up and expect them to take you. They're busy. So make sure that you have talking points available to link your research to what they do, and do not ask for it to do research first. That's like asking to go to third base on the first date. They don't know you. You need to give them some time to know who you are and how you are showing up in this space. Yes, you too, Don Compton. And then determine your added value to their priorities, what it is that they want to focus on, and craft your message accordingly. So when I got started here, I'd had more than 75 meetings with people in the first year that I got here. And what's not important is what you can't read because this text is so small. What's important is the diversity of who is here. I met with the mayor's office. I met with city and county government. I met with our universities. I met with United Way, the Housing Authority, the Children's Council, University of Florida. I met with Whole Child Leon. I met with the hospital. I met with FSU. anyone and everyone who had something to do with those maps, anyone and everyone who had something to do with where children are, the children my partnership was trying to impact. Once you have a better understanding, you're starting to get to well known, you now need to get to work. To get to work, you probably need to structure your partnership in a certain way for success. If you don't do that, you will get overwhelmed and you'll lose direction, because this is hard and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and you do have other things to do, right? So structure your relationships and your partnerships for success. And always remember that the research is your problem. It's not theirs. They don't have to do this. They do not have to invite you into their spaces to ask and answer questions that you think are important, right? So organize your work so that you're not making chaos for them. Only ask for what you absolutely need, and I'm a researcher. I admit I want it all. I want all the data, every single data point you can give me to the end of time. I want it, and I want it right now. But is that really what you need to answer the questions you need to answer? And then finally, you gotta be where you say you're gonna be and do what you say you're going to do. Trust is the currency upon which these relationships are built. It's hard to get, and it is very easy to lose. And once you lose it, just like any other relationship, it's not likely you're getting it back. So make sure you show up. So we structure our partnerships in such a way that there are different ways that we can engage with different partners in the community so that we can activate the partnership. Partnership is a tool. You have to use it. If you're here just to drop logos, it will not work. You have to have a way to engage with them. So we talk about connecting with some of our partners, connecting them to all of these evidence-based resources and tools that are available to them. We talk about championing our partners, because we don't always have to make the event, make the initiative, create the thing. They don't want to be saved by us. They want a hand up, not a handout. So when can you get behind them and support what it is that they are doing? And bring what you know, bring your evidence to bear, but bring what you know to get behind them. And then finally, if we're looking for deeper, long-term engagement with them, those are collaborations. And our collaborations are organized as research practice partnerships. There is a growing field here around research practice partnerships, particularly in education. You can go to William T. Grant Foundation and find out more about it. But what you will see is they're generally organized as long-term collaborations that are focused on educational improvement and or equitable transformation of those stakeholders they're focused on. There is absolutely a focus on engagement with research, not civic engagement. This is research engagement. You're looking for research outcomes here because you want to inform the field as well as the people you're working with. They count on diverse forms of expertise to do this joint work. So it's about having researchers and your partners on an equal playing field, where you share the burden and the responsibility for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. No one necessarily is in lead the entire time. So we organize ourselves in these partnerships, and we leverage teams to go faster. So we've been talking a lot about translation. There is a whole field out there on translational science. When you look at it, generally you will find it that these are folks who are in medicine or in public health fields. They talk a lot about creating translational scientists. Translational scientists have all of these awesome characteristics in one person. They're rigorous researchers, they skilled communication skills, they are process innovators and team players, they cross boundaries, they do all of these fabulous things, and we should develop more of them. However, we think there's a certain level of urgency here. And we think that there's a lot of talent amongst us already, where some of us are pretty good at some of these things and not others. So what if we work together? So we talk about creating translational teams that use all that we have available to us and bring it to bear. For example, at FCRR, I've got expert implementers and skilled communicators, and I've got domain scholars and multimodal disseminators, and I've got people who are super great at methods. We call them methods mavens. They are awesome, and they know how to take their methods and build bridges across different disciplines so we can talk to each other. And obviously, I'm a big picture thinker, so I get to be at the top. In order to make this happen, this all doesn't have to be me. There are many of us here who are interested in and capable of contributing to this space. If you can figure out how to do that, you don't have to do this by yourself. What does it look like on the ground? Here's one example of one project that we did with Leon County Schools, where we found that they were using 2 specific reading programs in the district. One was called Hardman, one was called Hegarty. Both of these programs suggest that they are improving these reading skills that we care a lot about: phonological awareness, phonics, those sorts of skills, overall reading achievement. And what they knew in the school was that people were using these things and it caught on like wildfire. Like literally one school was using it, and then 2 weeks later, 6 schools were using it. And then 2 weeks later, 12 schools were using it. So they were suddenly just catching fire. It seemed like we didn't understand why that was happening. We knew that it was happening with different levels of fidelity and implementation, something we care a lot about as researchers. So people were just using these things unbridled. So we said to them, well, you know, you can look at that. You can look at the outcomes for students who are receiving instruction in these different conditions and see the benefit of the outcomes of these different programs. And so that's what we did. It's a very much so underpowered quasi-experimental design. But what did we find? We found, in particular, for students in kindergarten through 2nd grade, those students who were in one program, Hegarty, they actually did worse than kids who were not in that program. And kids who were in a combined condition, they did just as well as kids who were in business as usual control. So what they found, this evidence that we have that suggests that maybe one program is doing more harm than good, and one program isn't doing any better than what you were already doing, so why are we investing in that, right? So what did we discover? Well, the researcher in me is super excited. I've got some preliminary evidence about the effectiveness of 2 programs that are pretty popular. A lot of people are using it. So, man, can I drop that in RCT? Because that would be really interesting, right? There's theoretical implications here because those programs are designed with different frameworks that help us think about reading development and reading achievement. I would really like to do a couple experiments with some robots to figure that out. There are processes associated with the uptake and use of evidence. How is it that this program moved around this district so fast and was taking up so fast? There are real research questions here that I could spend the next 20 years digging into. And I would be very happy with that. Makes this side of my brain itch, right? But how did the research engagement actually contribute to their outcomes? Well, the district now has district-wide support for an evidence-based instructional program that's happening in all 24 elementary schools that they purchased. And they purchased professional development support for teachers to be able to use that well. And fewer schools are using these other programs in inappropriate or ineffective ways, if at all. They now want studies looking at principals and coaches as leaders in the building, because those are the folks who make decisions about what programs get in there in the first place. So they want to better understand these people and how they process this information, how to activate them. They also want to understand more about these other programs, because there's like 43 different reading programs happening in the district right now. And they want to better understand outcomes for all their kids, including their older students, because a lot of our older students are not reading well in school, including our students with disabilities, because as you saw, there's a large percentage of students in the district who seem to be receiving services for disabilities. So we want to understand what's happening with them too. They're also instituting their own capacity building here. So they built surveys that they put out periodically and charge certain people with using to figure out what people are using in the school district, how they are using it, and whether or not it matters for kids, something they were not doing before. And now they have data dashboards. Like every district, tons of data on dashboards that nobody uses. So how can we figure out how to work together to bring these principles, this behavior of using evidence to make decisions, to bear on this tool, this resource the district has? And unlike the previous study, they're asking for this. They are leading these discussions. They're looking for us to help them. We have somehow built an appetite for using research to solve your problems. So finally, you evolve, you evaluate. Is this working? Is it helping? How do you know, right? Your capacity and your interests and your priorities will change as a result of doing this work. That's not what we thought we were going to do when we got there, but it is what we're doing. So our capacity will change as a result, because now I just showed you the list of 20 different things we got to figure out how to do, right? Their capacity and interests and priorities will change as well. They're not sitting still. Systems are dynamic, right? They've got new curricula that have been onboarded in this time that they got to figure out. We've got new state standards that are onboarded that we have to figure out. We have state legislation in education right now that makes a difference. They've got teacher shortages that are making a difference, leader shortages that are making a difference, lots of things that are happening for them where our work may not be the priority like it was anymore. So you go back to where you started. You reevaluate whether or not you're getting what you expect to have happen out of this work. You pivot if you can, you start anew if you can, or you end it if you can. And all of that is okay. This is one way to do research and engage our communities. It is not the only way. And I'm not even saying it's the best way. There are some questions that you can't answer as well in this frame. There's other work to be done. So it doesn't mean everything has to happen this way. But if you do it this way and you've built a solid partnership, you guys will stay. You will stay at the table and work together. I think in our last few minutes, it's important to talk about where we're going with this, because I hope if you walk away with one thing here, it's that one, this is hard, but two, this is doable. You need to be strategic and intentional in how you set up your space to work in this way, but if you do, you can really take on what I think is a tremendous responsibility for us. But I also think that universities and the researchers in them are uniquely positioned and talented to take on this work. This is something that we can do better, I think, than most. But you have to decide and be intentional about how you do it. For example, you've got to build infrastructure and capacity for this to happen, right? Not everybody knows how to make a pitch. Not everybody's comfortable talking with non-academic people about the work that they want to do. Not all non-academic people are comfortable talking to you, right? So for example, in our research center, we have a unit called the Innovative Research Dissemination Lab. Some of those folks are in the room today, who help us think about how to create some targeted dissemination tools to get this evidence and this work out there in the world and help our researchers do that too. We are also building infrastructure in the university. So we have a grant with the William T. Grant Foundation that's focused on how to build infrastructure in FSU and in Florida A&M to work in this way. We're working with our partners at the National Network for Education Research Practice Partnerships, also in this room today, who are helping us think through what would it take for a public research university to work in this way, which is very different than many other universities around the nation, because most folks who are doing work like this are private universities who have large endowments that allow them to do some of the things that we're trying to do on state funds. So we're trying to figure out how to build capacity for that here, and not just do it in Leon County schools, but also do it in Florida A&M's Developmental Research School. In doing that, we're building supports for faculty at FSU to do that. And so we have 2 faculty fellows, one of which is in this room, who are helping us think through what kind of support do you need as an individual faculty person from this university to work in this way. And we cannot wait to see what discoveries that they will come up with in special education and in higher education research. And so I'm going to give a shameless plug, because a part of this, in terms of building capacity at a university, is figuring out how we recognize and support our faculty who are doing this work. So we've created a pilot program for a new faculty award focused on this work. Use QR code. You can go to our website, look at the application, and see if you're interested. Deadline is December 15th. The second strategy is creating and sustaining research partnerships. So do more. Can we make more of this happen, right? We have our partnership in Leon County Schools. It was initially a 3-year partnership. It's renewed for another 5 years, and we have evolved to focus on post-secondary success as well, because that's what they want help with. That's where their problem is. And so somehow we're going to figure out how to also focus on cradle to college and career in this partnership work. We're going to build a new partnership between Florida A&M and Florida A&M's Developmental Research School, which is their school district. So how does that university work with its school district to do research that is of interest and of impact to that school district? We also have new relationships with community partners. This is one in particular focused on Leon County Public Library, where we created These Book Nook bundles, which took advantage of resources that are available at FCRR and mapped them on to culturally relevant texts and storybook guides and put them out there in the world to train librarians, youth services librarians, on how to make use of these resources to improve reading and early language and literacy outcomes for kids that they were serving. And right now, you can go to Leon County's public library and check out a Book Nook. We put, I think, 20 in every branch in Leon County. But we're also doing the research to investigate the outcomes for our youth sciences librarians, as well as for the families to take advantage of these resources. We're also doing research, primary research, where research engagement is embedded in it. So this is a new NIH center that is focused specifically on translating science related to students with disabilities, in particular learning disabilities. And research engagement is embedded throughout. We have advisory boards with folks for whom this is their lived experience who will be a part of this. We'll have community engagement studios where we go into communities where this research is happening and help better understand what their needs are and what their priorities are. We're going to take advantage of our very own citizen scientist curriculum that was developed in part with the medical school here to build citizen scientists within our community partners in this work. We'll do that locally. Our part of that is going to be focused on the Panhandle, but we also have the Regional Education Lab. The work that it does in the 6 states across the Southeast are all organized around partnerships. Everything is organized around a partnership with a state education agency, a local education agency, or a college or university, and what their problems are and how we can help them solve them. I would also say you have to help people learn how to do this, and why not start from the beginning? So we have doctoral training grants, and in those doctoral training grants, our students are being pushed to learn these competencies and develop these skills now, not when you become mid-career and senior faculty. And it's much harder to do at that time. So for example, we bought the Ellen Alda Center for Communicating Science Effectively here at Florida State to train them on how to do effective science communication. And finally, funding. Because let's be real, to do this work, you need the funding. But you don't need the funding to start. Funding helps you with sustaining. It makes a big difference to the quantity and the quality of work you do, but I have never started a partnership with money in hand, because you go get it together. And our funding agencies are much more inclined these days to do that. They're asking for communities to step in different ways than they used to. They want communities to be the PI. They want them to be the fiscal agent. They want the questions to come from them. And you have to show it better than just in a letter of support. It has to look authentic and real, like you've been together for some time before they will give you the money. And all of these agencies are asking for that, and not just these agencies. Department of Defense, Department of Energy, all of our different departments in the federal government are asking for a return on investment of these public funds for our research. So if we want to continue to get those funds, we're going to have to get better at engaging around our research. So these are our 5 strategies for getting this going. But now let's talk about you. In the last few minutes here, you have a message box on the table in front of you. You all walked in here and we asked you if you were a researcher when you walked into the space or your community partner when you walked in the space. But you all have problems, challenges, issues you're thinking about trying to solve. And what we're suggesting is if you do those things together, you might get further faster, right? So what's the problem you're trying to solve? There's this real myth out there that suggests that the people who are not researchers, these non-scientists in the world, that they just don't understand what we're saying. It's just too complicated what we're saying, so we just need to be better about explaining it. Let's talk about it more, yell about it more, put it out there in the world more, and then maybe they'll just do what we told them to do, because you know we discovered that some time ago. Won't y'all just do what we told you to do? Because we know, right? But the reality is scientific fact is pretty nuanced. For most of us in all of our fields and the work that we do, there really isn't a clean-cut answer. It's always an if-then. And it's always evolving, always changing, new discoveries to be made every single day. It's hard to keep up. And even if you can, there are a lot of communicators out there. That film I showed you, the Right to Read film, about how they view and think about reading difficulties and what's happening in the world, has millions more views than anything FCRR will put out in the world, ever. So there are a lot of people talking about these issues that we care a lot about. You gotta think about how you're in the conversation. And in general, People make decisions about evidence not just based on science. They make decisions based on their values, based on their group, who it is that they're around, based on their media exposure and engagement, based on beliefs and values, based on how well they understand math and science. Lots of different reasons about how people make their decisions. It's not just because a scientist said it, so I'll do it. So the message box is a tool you can use to help you craft your message by first thinking about who your audience is and then figuring out how you want to talk to that audience about the issue, the problems that are there, the benefits of the work that you're going to do, the solutions you propose, and why it even matters. The message box is a free tool. It was developed by this group, Compass. You can get it for free online. These were climatologists and oceanographers who were really concerned that people weren't taking their evidence seriously in the world, and we're trying to figure out how to get the public to make use of that evidence. It has now evolved into this free tool, and they actually will come and talk to you about how to do these things better. So I asked you when you walked in the room to start to draft this out for yourselves. I'm sure everybody did their homework, so I'm not going to check your papers, because I'm sure you all did it, right? But in the next, I don't know, let's give them 10 minutes or so. Share with the people at your table, what is the issue you are working on? How are you trying to solve that problem? And ask yourselves the hard questions. Are you talking past each other or to each other? Is the issue that you think is so important, does the people at your table think it's important too? Why do they think it's important, right? Who isn't at this table that maybe should be, to help you think through how it is you might work with them to solve this problem? And how long would it take? If it worked, how would you know? And how long would it take to get there? What kind of resources would it take to get there? In the room with us today are at least 8 of my doctoral students who I've made do this. It's actually an assignment in their course. It takes them an entire semester to get one draft. That's how hard it is what I'm asking you to do. So that's why there are pencils on your table. It's a draft. It's supposed to be a draft. But there's no time like the present to start practicing. So those 8 students will step up and will come around to your tables and help facilitate your discussions and what you're thinking about as you use the message box, okay? We'll come back together. It is 1:10. We're gonna come back together in about 10 minutes, and I wanna hear about how it goes, okay? Okay, so what did you discover about each other? Anybody want to share any insights or thoughts from this exercise that you gleaned from this? I also was a special education teacher. I know wait times, 7 seconds, and I will call names. But there were some interesting insights that came through. I would love for some of you to be so brave to say it. Yes?
As I was just walking around this one table, there were some overlaps in issues that were identified, but then I felt like everybody gained clarity when they realized, oh, we have to think about how this issue relates to a diverse set or list of audiences, and then how everything within that message box will change depending on who you're going to have this conversation with.
Absolutely. That is one big thing. I think a secret sauce to this is you have to identify your audience, and it makes you do it because you do start to recognize that you might have the same goal, same problem, but the messaging will be very different depending on the audience and the medium through which you want to communicate with that audience. What else came through? Yep.
Our table realized that we weren't in isolation, so there were themes and trends across all of us with the problem we were focusing on. So it made you feel like you immediately had a team to talk to, because whatever your problem was, somebody had experience, and so you weren't in isolation. This wasn't unique to you, so there was a lot to pull from.
I think that's an important thing to think about as researchers, the researchers in the room. Part of our job and the way it seeds itself is for us to be experts in what we do. Nobody knows more about what you're doing than you. We in fact train you like this, but it creates silos. You suddenly, everything is around your world, and you don't take the time to look up because you don't have time to look up and see how you exist in that world. Engaging with the public around your research and engaging with each other around your research makes the experience less isolating, because there are very likely many more people who want to do something like what you're doing in one way or another. And I do think we can get further faster if we do it together. What else? Yes, ma'am.
So in talking this through, we also realized that you can look at this from the broad perspective of your problem, and as you start working through it, you probably will have more of these boxes to work through the smaller issues. So it starts with the big, and then you're going to have more, each component may have a message box that then kind of goes down into another few boxes.
Exactly. And remember, I'm going to encourage us, remember that's us as the researchers, right? That's how we think about it. The world just sees reading, right? So even though we get all the particulars, it is in fact why we should be there. Like, you shouldn't suppress that about yourself. That is part of your superpower. The expertise you have to bring to bear on these challenges is very important. So we should not suppress that. It's just keeping in mind when you're out there talking to everybody else, they just see reading, right? And so how can we figure out how to bridge that for them? And let me go ahead and admit how hard this is. This presentation was 72 slides. That's supposed to be in 45 minutes. And I still think there's more stuff I could say, because you should have seen the heat maps I had. Like, there's way more stuff I could have done. And I talked to Evangeline and I was like, okay, I can get it, because I was at 102 slides on Monday, so I'm just saying. I understand how hard it is. And yes, someone asked me, I will share the slides, so for all the links and things are in there, I can share the slides. We have your registration, so we can share it. As you continue to practice this and do this work, I will say, so again, I study reading, I don't study communication, but there is a whole discipline about that. There are people who actually do this on purpose as a profession. We can learn from these people, right? So for example, this particular book from Chris Yankee, I first ran into this maybe 10 years ago, but she has a way of talking about message development and these 5 C's of message development. So when you feel like your message box has message boxes upon message boxes upon message boxes, right? That you try to get to the 5 C's: clarity, connection, compelling, concise, and continual, right? So think about how it is that in the messaging that you're doing, you can try to put these threads through so that people understand what it is you're trying to do, the problems you're trying to help them solve, and how you all can work together on them. This is not easy, but for example, I think you can get there. So this is what we do at FCRR. Every single one of us knows a child who's struggling in school with reading. It might be your child. It might be a child that you see next door in your community. It maybe even was you. Everyone knows a child who's struggling with how to read in school.
The mission of FCRR is, I think, best described under the tagline of FCRR: research, innovation, and engagement. At its core, FCRR is a research institute. We do basic and applied research, but our research really is done with the eye towards, helping children, helping families, helping teachers and other stakeholders, and making sure that every child learns how to read.
We know that reading is important to every life outcome that we have, that reading really is critical for everyone's quality of life. Then we need to be coming up with solutions, and those solutions must be informed by science. They must be informed by rigor, and they must be relevant to making sure that all children are succeeding in life.
We have a reading and writing crisis in the United States. 1/3 of children can read at proficient levels and can write at proficient levels. This is a serious crisis that needs to be solved.
We have to find multiple levers that we can try and push to see if we can get kids to read better. It's not going to be one thing. There's no one simple solution to this, because this problem has multiple causes.
We're deeply interdisciplinary in that faculty are across many different units and different domains that are studying reading.
The work is not only national, but it's also international.
We're trying to help kids in the United States and perhaps even around the world become better readers.
Over the last 20 years, FCRR has really created a model for how it is that a university-based research center can be designed and can be operated. And we should be using what we know to make sure that children are reading, because there's no child's life that we are willing to risk by just guessing. Instead, what we want to do is make sure that we design solutions that address what children need and make sure that everyone possible has access to it so that they don't have to guess at what they need to do to make sure kids can read. They know what to do to make sure that children can read. Everybody think they know what our problem is that we're trying to solve? What are we trying to solve? What's the problem? Just want to make sure kids can read. It took 2 minutes to make that video instead of 72 slides. That's what you want to get to. So please continue to watch and learn. There are more discoveries on the horizon for us at FCRR, and I'm certainly there for you as well. We do have resources and information available on our website. I will share these slides for you for anybody who wants to see them. Thanks for joining me for lunch. I'll see you soon.